We are still in chapter 6, Mishnah number 6 of Pirkei Avos, the 48 ways to wisdom. We're up to way number 41. Misyashev libo b'talmudo. Now, what does this mean? So literally it means, misyashev means to sit or to be settled, to have your heart settled in your studies. Now, what exactly does that mean? If you recall, way earlier in our studies of the 48 ways to wisdom, we had way number 13, which was biyishuv, which we defined as with equilibrium, with a certain balance, to not be scattered, to be stable, to be grounded. That's the optimal state for study. If someone's always busy and very erratic in their studies, and they do a few minutes here, a few minutes there, that's not a way to acquire wisdom. You have to sit down, you have to have a lot of time, and you have to be in the right frame of mind for study. We have a similar word here, misyashev libo b'talmudo. It's the same Hebraic root as b'yishuv, but here the focus is on the method of study. When a person studies, it should be a well-grounded version of studying, and it's not so clear initially what that means. And of course, the commentaries offer a variety of interpretations. So one idea we read is that when you study, you should be settled. It's something that you do when you're settled down. It's not something that you do on the fly. It's not drive-by study. It's not something you do periodically, episodically, occasionally. You should be grounded in your studies. That should be primary in your life's pursuits, not something that you do in an ancillary fashion, something that you do in a settled, permanent, and established manner. What's primary in a person's life? What's primary? What's the overarching objective, and what's secondary? What's tertiary? What's ancillary? Way number 41 tells us that the Torah study should be a permanent fixture of your life. It should be well-grounded. Now, what does this mean? A lot of people are gainfully employed, and people are busy with a lot of important things, their family, and they have their daily meals, and they have their responsibilities. When the Mishnah is telling us that Torah study should be something which is essential to our lives, it should be primary to our lives, that does not necessarily mean that it should be the bulk of our day. It's not measured by time, rather as what's the most important thing that I do in a given day? When do I become alive? When am I really engaged? If we want to fulfill way number 41 properly, when a person studies, that's when they become alive. We had earlier in the book, way back in chapter 1, we were advised, Asay Toroscha keva u'malachtecha arai. Make your Torah study permanent, and your work, that should be impermanent. That should be passing. And again, what that means, we said that earlier, what that means is that, if someone studies for 10 hours a day, but they're not doing it in a serious, well-grounded fashion, even though they have so much time dedicated towards it, it's not permanent. It's not well-grounded. Whereas if someone only has an hour, 2 hours to study a day, there's 20, 23, 22 hours that they're doing other things. But if that's when they become alive, that's where they feel like this is what I'm living for, they are well-grounded in their study, and their Torah study is keva, it is permanent. And so it is telling us that you want to acquire the Almighty's Torah. One of the ways to do it is to have an attitude shift and assigning primacy to Torah study. When you do that, your acquisition of Torah will be deeper and will be greater. And I was thinking, today in Israel, there is a very vigorous and strident debate about a 76-year-old precedent of allowing yeshiva students whose Torah to umanoto, which means their Torah is their job, is their occupation, is their profession. They've had deferral, an automatic army deferral from mandatory conscription. Every 18-year-old in Israel, they have to go join the army for 3 years. If you are a yeshiva student, if Torah is your occupation, your profession, for 76 years now, there's been a precedent that you can defer. So you're studying, okay, defer it until you reach the point where you're no longer desired by the army, you're too old, then you have a ptur, means then you're absolved from army service. And this has allowed for the creation of an incredible empire of Torah study in Israel. There's hundreds of thousands of scholars who are spending 10, 15 hours a day studying Torah. And in my opinion, this is an incredible asset for the state. And in my opinion, and I believe that this is well-founded in the literature, when you have something, the heartbeat of a nation is Torah study, then the blessings will be found in all other places in the society. This will cause a wellspring of blessing to cascade throughout the whole land and country. I was looking this past week at the GDP per capita. Israel, it was like all they had was some agriculture. They had some Jaffa oranges, and very, very quickly they became an incredible economic superpower. I look, they have a higher GDP per capita than the United Kingdom and France and Italy. And with all their problems, they're strong and they're dynamic. And what is the spiritual reason for such a bounty? To me, it seems obvious. There's such a flourishing, robust, dynamic Torah environment at the heartbeat of the nation, and that provides blessing for everyone. And I think this is especially important to preserve in times of war. There are many, many sources that talk about a weakening in Torah study automatically bringing about catastrophe. For example, the first war that our nation waged, chapter 17 in Exodus, even before the Sinai revelation, Jewish people leave Egypt and they are attacked by the nation of Amalek. And the Talmud deduces, the Talmud pinpoints, the cause of the conflict was a weakening of Torah study. That's why they were attacked. And there are many other examples of this phenomenon. When there's a weakening of Torah study provides protection. It provides a shield. And when that shield is removed, it right away results in attack. So I think it's very dangerous to tamper with Torah in volatile times. It makes you more vulnerable. And I'm listening to the debates that are happening right now in Israel. And some argue, well, if we conscript all the yeshiva students, we could carve out a system for them. They have a few hours of study every day. They can study while in the army. And for someone not initiated in matters of Torah, it sounds logical. Well, they could have everything. They could still study, and they could still contribute towards the security and defense of the nation as conscripts. And I think what is missing is this idea. The optimal way to acquire Torah, it's not just by also finding some time, carving out time for Torah study. If someone does a couple of hours incidental study every day, it's great and it's celebrated. It's the best thing in the world, but there's no fulfillment of being settled in your studies. So you're not grounded in Torah, and that is a completely different dimension of study. When someone studies, it's, again, something to celebrate, but the higher level of acquisition of Torah and the deepening of the connection can only be done once this is Torah to umanato, it's their profession. So that's one idea of way number 41. Misyashev libo b'talmudo, when a person, that is their primary objective of life when they are pursuing study. There's another interpretation that the commentaries offer. And that is approaching the study in a methodical way, trying to go to the depths of Torah. That, of course, is of paramount importance, to not just subsist with a superficial study, to try to go deeper and to understand the other dimensions of insight. But how do you approach the depths of study? This way number 41 is Misyashi. You have to be settled. Your heart has to be settled before you go deeper, to approach the depth slowly. There is an incredible, really infinite level of brilliance and ingenuity in Torah. It's really unfathomable. I've been in some of the great yeshivos in the world, and this is legitimate. People can spend a half a year, 6 months, on 5 or 6 or 7 pages of Talmud. And they could do that and not waste time. You know, we think, oh, well, they're studying only 6 pages of Talmud or 7 pages of Talmud or 8 pages of Talmud. And they're doing it for 6 months. They must be just spending a lot of time smoking and drinking coffee and chit-chat. But no, it's totally legitimate and common and routine for people to spend 10 plus hours a day studying for a half a year and not cover more than a couple of pages of Talmud. And this is not because they're slow or they're dense or they're mentally challenged or incapable. People who are very bright, very committed. And the reason why is because there's so much infinite depth. The study is unfathomably rich. There's so much depth that you could really spend a whole month on 1 page and not waste any time. But how do you approach those depths? Some people want a shortcut. They want to plunge in to the depth before being settled, before being grounded. They reach for the pizzazz before they are ready. And that's a problem, because that's an artificial depth. You have to approach it slowly and carefully. If you try to penetrate a subject too deeply before you really completely well-versed in the basics, it's not a recipe for success. So you have to always start with the most basic level and work your way deeper from there. You study the Talmud, you read like every 2 words, every line, it's a whole different, it's a question, it's an answer, it's a proof, it's a challenge, it's a citation. And before you get to even any of the commentaries, even the most basic of commentaries, you're trying to understand, what's the question, what's the answer, and also how does the answer address the question? This is like the most basic level of being trained how to think. And every question has some perception, some assumptions that are built into the question. And if you're going to provide an answer to that question, you have to understand how that answer resolves the question. What elements of the question are addressed by the answer? Sometimes the answer accepts the assumptions and the perceptions of the question. It's just there's some other variable that wasn't present or wasn't front of mind in the question that's now introduced in the answer. Sometimes the answer completely challenges questions or disregards the assumptions that were baked into the question. So just again, the framework, the mechanisms of the questions and answers, that's very simple, of course, but there's no way to go to the deeper understanding. Well, what's the actual underlying philosophy of the question, of the answer, and so on? You can't get there unless you understand the basics. And again, the basics are or could be viewed as being tedious. And everyone wants to get to the dazzle of the study without being grounded in the basics. But there's no shortcuts. And again, studying Talmud, if you ever have the great privilege, every line, every word, you want to understand what's it saying. Oh, and what's it not saying? What is conspicuously absent? What's the dog that's not barking? And why does it say this with this terminology, with this precise set of words, and maybe not what we imagine would have been a better way to phrase it? This is written with unfathomable depth. Everything, every single word, it's all measured and precise with astronomical precision. That's just the Talmud. And then you read the commentary, start with Rashi. What's he doing? He's not telling us something that we would otherwise know. What's he revealing to us? Only if you familiarize yourself with that sort of very careful study, only then can you try to understand, okay, well, we have a dispute amongst the greatest of the commentators. What's the underlying reason of the dispute? If they were here duking it out in front of us, what would they say? How would Rashi respond to the question? The question seems obvious. There's no way that Rashi missed it. Again, the outsider may say, well, maybe Rashi just mailed it in. That's the mark of a newcomer. There's no way. There's no way that the question that the Tosfos commentary asks on Rashi, that he just forgot that other teaching of the Talmud. That's not possible. That's not an option. He knew exactly the question that the other commentary is going to pose upon his writings. He knew exactly the citation, and nevertheless, he wrote these words. Now go figure out, how would he resolve it? Now we're slowly approaching the more deeper ways of studying. Of course, it starts with the text of the Talmud. Now we introduce the commentaries, and they're at odds. And now you understand the problem. Now you're trying to break, so to speak, this subject wide open, and then you're slowly approaching the actual underlying depth. And that's where it gets really exciting. That's why it's so intoxicating, because it's so rich and it's so precise and it's so wonderful, but there's a lot of work they have to put in. Again, the things that can be viewed as being tedious to really, really understand the basics before moving on to the commentaries, before plunging into the depths. If you look at the bookshelves in the yeshivos, you have a book of Talmud, Baba Metzia, Kiddushin, so on, Subis, Yivamas, all these incredible books of Talmud. There's a whole library of commentaries and essays on this book. There's not a single book of Talmud that you could study it with all the commentaries in one lifetime. It's not possible. Literally thousands upon thousands of thick books on every book of Talmud. And again, there's no filler material. And the razzle, dazzle, pizzazz, exciting stuff, that you have to earn. And that's what one of the ways the commentaries are interpreting this way to wisdom. You have to be well grounded in your studies before you go deep. Because if you do that, it's artificial, and so you're not really acquiring the Torah. There's another benefit of this, by the way. The slower you progress into a subject, the more of it you will retain. If it's just you plunge in and then you plunge right back out, fast in, fast out, it's not a way to really understand it. It's going to escape very, very quickly. So this is way number 41 to wisdom. Misyashev libo b'talmudo. Your heart should be well grounded in your studies. If you do that, you will have another way to acquire the Almighty's holy Torah. Let's continue with way number 42. We are again in chapter 6, Mishnah number 6 of Pirkei Avos, of the ethics of the fathers, the 48 ways to wisdom, and way number 42 is Shoel Umeshiv. Shoel means to ask, Meshiv means to answer, asking and answering. That's a way to acquire wisdom. Some versions of this Mishnah have an additional clause, Shoel ke'inyin, asking on topic, Umeshiv kehalacha, and responding accurately. To give answers to questions, to ask questions. This is a form, this is a methodology to acquire Torah. Now, what exactly does this mean? So, on the most basic level, it means to ask questions, to challenge. If you find an incompatibility between how you would have understood a subject and how the subject is presented, that's an opportunity because there's a mismatch, right? This is the way you would have thought. And the way you're encountering the subject is different. The way you're reading the text is different. Now that's an opportunity. There's the mismatch. It's off. Okay, so there's something to figure out why what you would have thought is not the way it is presented. So to ask questions, but also to ask questions on topic. There are a lot of topics in Torah, effectively an infinite amount of topics. And, we're fallible. We're not angels. We're not computers. We try to understand one subject at a time. And therefore, it's important to make sure that when you do ask questions, they are on topic. And if you're trying to study something and it's confusing as is, you got to do it very slowly, very carefully. You're trying to slowly edge your way into the deeper elements and realms. If someone throws a curveball and they ask a question that's off topic, it's from a different subject, and you just create this little mishmash where you're studying one subject, but the question comes in from left field, that creates confusion. And you'll end up that both subjects, the subject that you're studying and the question that came from a different subject, they both will become garbled. So make sure your questions, which are very powerful and very necessary, as we shall see, that they actually relate to the subject at hand and enhance the study, because if they are from a different subject, it's going to detract from the study. So not all questions are created equal. The Talmud advises us to never ask off-topic questions. If you're dealing with one book of Talmud, this is the book and this is the subject matter that you are supposed to render questions upon. Don't ask from different subjects, from different books. And I would also say, more generally, there's an art, there's a skill to know how to ask questions. To be able to distill a question to the point where the question itself will be helpful towards advancing your studies. How are you positioning the question? And how the question will help you slice to the heart of the matter. Questions can be very powerful, very helpful in helping you go deeper and deeper into a subject. If you have a subject, you want to break it open. How do you do that? You do it with questions. And if you ask all the questions, you now have the starting pieces for opening up the portals of insight on any given matter. I've tried this many times, and it's a very helpful exercise. Suppose you want to go deeper on any subject in Torah. You have a citation. It could be from the written Torah, from the Talmud, from the Mishnah, whatever it is. You read the citation, and you try to challenge yourself to find, let's find 5 questions. Let's just write down 5 questions on what we just read. It could be just a verse with Rashi. And you're training yourself to say, okay, let's try to attack it. And sometimes, the questions are, just simple, what does this mean? Why are we told this? How will you implement this? The counterfactuals, what would have happened had something else happened, or had this not been the way it is? You train yourself to ask questions, and those will be key elements to help you open up the whole subject and to give you access to the deeper perspectives. And they're supposed to be challenging, because by doing that, it helps sharpen and deepen your understanding of a given matter. We don't want to remain with just a very simple, superficial understanding. We want to go deeper, and those questions are very helpful. And even if we are deeper, and we're already dealing with the more subtle nuances of a subject, and we have a perspective, and we're building out an understanding, you challenge that. You, let's say, present it in a public fashion, people are challenging it. You could actually strengthen it. Say, oh, I didn't think of that point. So it must be it's a little bit different. And you upgrade and you iterate your understanding with the help of those questions. There's a very dramatic story in the Talmud. It's dramatic for a whole host of reasons. It's also problematic if you think about it. But part of the story is about the power and the utility of questions. This is found in the book of Bava Metzia on page 84a, and it tells the story of the greatest rabbi in Israel in the 3rd century. His name was Rabbi Yochanan, not to be confused with Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who lived in the 1st century, who was a Tana, was one of the authors of the Mishnah. This is Rabbi Yochanan, who lived in the 3rd century, who was an Amora, one of the authors of the Talmud. So he comes after the Mishnah is already codified and canonized. And it tells a story how he once had an encounter with a famous bandit. There was a bandit who was known for his legendary physical prowess and insatiable appetite for banditry, for theft, for highway robbery. Someone with incredible ability and power and strength, but it was being improperly channeled towards very criminal, very, very evil pursuits. So the great rabbi, we're told, he was very beautiful. Just incredibly, incredibly beautiful. And then gives descriptions of how beautiful he was. He had a radiant, resplendent countenance. And he was once in the Jordan River, and he was bathing in the river, and he has this chance encounter with this famous thief and bandit who was named Reish Lakish, Shimon, the son of Lakish. And the bandit sees this person, and he starts to pursue him to go rob him. And he stops him, and he says, let's have a conversation. And he tells him a very famous line, "Chelach le'oraisa." You have such strength, such power, such prowess. You should utilize that for Torah. You're someone of just incredible, immense strength. Why are you using it for such a nefarious purpose? Use it for Torah. And the bandit responds to him, you think I'm misallocating my abilities. You're misallocating your abilities. He responds to him, Yafyach or Shufrach, Lenashim, your beauty should be for women. You tell me my power should be for Torah. Your beauty should be for women. So the rabbi tells him, listen, I am confident that if you were to dedicate your strengths, your abilities to Torah, you'd become one of the great sages of the era. I believe in that. And you commented about my beauty. I have a sister. She's way more beautiful. We'll make a deal. You commit yourself to Torah study with all your vigor, with all your strength, and I will persuade my sister to marry you. and they strike a deal. And this is one of the most consequential events of the era, as we shall see. So Reish Lakish, the bandit, accepts it. And the first interesting point, well, the whole story is just fascinating, but every part of it is fascinating for a different reason. It describes how he would be able to leap into the water, over the water, from inside the water, he could jump out. He was able to like kind of tread and just leap out of the water, just a physical specimen. He's in the water now. He signs the pact with Rabbi Yochanan. He tries to jump out of the water. He can't do it anymore. Like his physical strength sapped. Like he kind of mentally dedicated his strength to Torah, and it was no longer utilizable. I don't know if that's even a word. He can no longer channel that towards physical pursuits as much as he did previously. So they get married, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan's sister, and he starts teaching him Torah. They start with just scripture. Teaches him scripture, all of scripture. And they move on to Mishnah. He masters the Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan's vision for this former bandit, it's been naturalized. He's really becoming a great person. And he, excuse me, and he indeed becomes the second greatest sage in the land. In fact, we have hundreds of citations in the Talmud from Reish Lakish. And he becomes a study partner and a Torah sparring mate with his brother-in-law. And they would study in the academy together. And there was once a debate, a very complicated halachic debate, as to when exactly weapons, either a sword or a knife or a dagger or a spear or a sickle, when do they become eligible for ritual impurity? Now, the backstory for that is that if something is under production, it's not being finished, it's not done, it's like you're trying to craft a product, but it's not finished, it cannot yet become impure because it's not finished. So once it does become finished, now it's huchshar, became now eligible to become impure because now it's a finished product. But at what stage in the production does it become eligible to become impure? So there was a debate. When is it completed? And Rabbi Yochanan had one opinion. He says, when you put it in the fire, when you want to kind of process steel, you're kind of banging it on the anvil, and then you're putting it in the fire, and then you're scouring it with water. He says, when you put it in the fire, that's when it's finished. And Reish Lakish, he argued. He said, no, not when you put it in the fire, but after you put it in the fire, you scour it in the water, that's when it becomes finished. So they have this disagreement, and it unfortunately devolved into an argument. And Rabbi Yochanan tells Reish Lakish, listen, you're a bandit. You know weapons. You know weapons. The bandit knows exactly all about the weapons. So that's an insult, because he's now a great sage. But he's kind of referencing his previous career as a bandit. So this kind of escalates into a little bit of an argument. And Reish Lakish responds to Rabbi Yochanan. He says, what did I gain? I was a bandit. And now you still call me a bandit. Like, what have I gained? And Rabbi Yochanan responds, what have you gained? What do you mean? I helped you become closer to the Almighty. I helped you become a great Torah sage. So there's a little bit of a dispute here. And Rabbi Yochanan, he took offense to what Reish Lakish said. And if I can advise you to never do something, is never cause a great Torah sage to be saddened, because that's very dangerous. Rabbi Yochanan became saddened as a result of this exchange, and immediately Reish Lakish became ill. Why? Because he contributed towards the great Rabbi Yochanan becoming offended. And there's an exchange where his sister comes over, a sister, which is the wife of Rish Lakish, and tries to say, to try to mend things over. It doesn't work out. And indeed, Rish Lakish passes away. So the second greatest sage in the land, the brother-in-law of Rabbi Yochanan, the former bandit, has passed away. And now Rabbi Yochanan doesn't have a sparring mate that's almost on his level. That's an equal, an equivalent to him. So he's trying to study, and he just can't do it because he no longer has Rish Lakish, and he's weeping, and he so thoroughly misses his brother-in-law, his sparring mate, and all the sages are trying to help replace Rish Lakish, who's irreplaceable. So they say, you know what, we're going to find the next greatest sage. His name is Rabbi Elazar ben Padas. He's the next greatest sage. He's going to kind of fill in the shoes of Rish Lakish. So Rabbi Elazar ben Padas, he kind of joins the academy. He's now going to take the role of Rish Lakish. And Rabbi Yochanan gives a lecture. And now it used to be that Rish Lakish would argue with him. But now this other sage is going to argue with him. So he starts giving his lecture. And Rabbi Elazar ben Padas, the replacement, he says, you know what? You're saying something very interesting. I will give you citations that prove your point. Everything he says, I'll prove it from this, I'll prove it from that. He's able to kind of enhance the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan with more proofs. Rabbi Yochanan is very disappointed. He's like, you're the replacement for Rish Lakish. When I would teach, and Rish Lakish was here, he would have given me proofs. He would ask me 24 questions on everything I said. And I would have to give him 24 answers to all his 24 questions. And as a result of that, the Torah and the halacha will become more clear and more expanded. And now you want to bring me proofs? We don't have that ability to go deeper as a result of these questions and answers and this intense questioning that Rish Lakish would afford. And Rabbi Yochanan, he became so despondent and melancholical as a result of the loss of Rish Lakish. He was just moping, and he ripped his garments, and he was weeping, and he says, what's going to be? Where are you? Rish Lakish, where are you? And he actually went crazy as a result of that. And indeed, he passed away in sorrow and agony over the loss of his friend, his brother-in-law, his sparring mate, and the one who would challenge and question him with every statement that he made. Now, again, this is a fascinating story. It's a sad story. It's a powerful story. It's a poignant story. But for our purposes, we see that there's a big difference between study that is upgraded with fierce, penetrating, probing questions versus a study that's, okay, I'll say something and it's nice, it's beautiful. Let me bring some proofs. Let me enhance it with proofs. Proofs, of course, and citations that support the position, that will enhance the study. But if I were to say something and you ask 24 questions and I have to give 24 answers to respond, that's a completely different level of enhancing and supporting the studies. And that's what our sages are telling us here. Way number 42, you have to ask and you have to answer. That is a means to upgrade and to deepen your Torah study. Now, part of asking questions and fielding questions, it's also contingent upon a person being able to reconsider their position. This is something which a lot of people are averse to doing. People have such, cognitive dissonance. They have such a perspective that is fixed. Someone asks a question, they just become defensive. And the idea of debate, of real legitimate debate, where you actually consider the other side, that is becoming increasingly rarer over time. If you're so married, so wedded to your ideas, they're not willing that a question's a challenge, and you view the questioner as an enemy, That's not that's not a system, it's not an attitude that will be benefited from questions. It's only when you're actually willing to consider like a question's a problem that you take seriously, and then you try to understand, and you're willing to discard your position if there's an unanswerable question that challenges it. This is how you upgrade your studies, with these sorts of questions. And I think if we're going to take Torah seriously, how can it be that we're comfortable with a question on a matter of Torah? It's serious. This is the will of the Almighty. This is 1,000% truth. We can't just say, what difference does it make if there's a question? Oh, it's not so important. It's like the pre-flight inspection. I was like, you're on the plane finally, and they're like, oh, we have a problem with the cabin door, So everyone gets upset because that means you're going to spend a few hours on the tarmac, or you might miss your flight, you might miss your appointments. But no one's going to say, what difference does it make if there's a few bolts missing on the plane? Oh, we'll just risk it. Let's wing it. Because we understand that the consequences are very grave if there's something wrong. The consequences of something wrong being present with Torah, that's very serious. When there's a question, you can't simply ignore it. Similarly, when other people ask questions, you cannot ignore it. How can you tolerate having something which is unresolved in Torah? If someone does not question Torah, or someone just shirks their responsibility to challenge, if someone avoids the pain of a question, if someone tries to avoid answering a question, they are treating Torah and matters of Torah with insufficient reverence, and obviously they won't acquire it as deeply. Moreover, as we have seen, if someone wants to ever get to the deeper insights, the deeper levels of understanding, one of the best ways to do it is via the question and answer format. And someone who does not do that will be locked out of the deeper understandings, and it's not what we want. We want to go as deep as we can, and therefore we have way number 42, Shoel Umeshiv, asking and answering. This is another terrific way to acquire Torah. And as I say all the time, I hereby am soliciting your questions. Send them to me via email, rabbiwolbe@gmail.com.